Veteran wide receiver Jalen Reagor has now signed to the Chargers practice squad and will likely be elevated at some point as Joe Ortiz stays committed to finding value in players looking for another chance.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 9 seasons, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, the Chargers brought in another wide receiver. Jalen Reagor is signed to the practice squad with intention of being elevated, and it just makes me feel like Josh Palmer might not quite be ready to come back quite yet. And Daiyan Henley has been on an absolute tear. What is his ceiling? I don't know if we have seen that yet. And the center position has been a little bit of a problem for the Chargers, but what can they do about it?
Yeah, they will have some options there. Hopefully, Bradley Bozeman can play better, but something has to change there. But today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Dave, we have our Chargers mailbag today, but I do want to start with just some Chargers news we didn't get to yesterday, which is that they are signing wide receiver Jalen Reagor to their practice squad, which they announced. This was how I first saw it per Jordan Schultz, who said the Chargers are signing wide receiver Jalen Reagor. He'll start on the practice squad with the likelihood he eventually gets elevated to the active roster. And David, this is a guy that was a first-round pick at one point, kind of started the trend of, first-round picks from TCU, or at least part of the trend, not being able to live up to the hype. And he's bounced around a little bit, and the Chargers are giving a dude a second chance here, really, like a fourth chance for Jalen Reagor. And it's kind of unclear what he brings to the table. I mean, at one point, he was a dangerous yards after the catch threat. But if he is elevated to this wide receiver room as it looks right now, I'm not exactly sure how much of an impact he'll make.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Reagor sitting at 5'11", 198 pounds. His best season was his rookie season, where he had 54 targets, 31 receptions, 396 yards, and a touchdown, but really has only been used sparingly since that point, and has bounced around to several different teams. I think the one thing that Jalen Reagor brings to the table is some special teams ability. He does have some extensive returns in his record. So he's already had 61 returns in his NFL career. So he has been somebody, if, the Chargers want to use Darius Davis maybe a little bit more on offense, maybe they bring in Jalen Reagor to handle the kickoff and kick return and punt return duties in his stead.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they actually elevate him this week. It feels like if Josh Palmer was to not play again, you would see that elevation. Maybe that's something where they want another special teams guy, but it's just hard to know what to expect from a guy that, over the last 2 years has 15 catches, right? And to me, when I think of Jalen Reagor, as I often do with guys that we evaluated coming out of the draft, it's just like I think of him as a guy who's electric with the ball in his hands. That's what he was at TCU. Kind of like how Quentin Johnston was at TCU. But over the last 2 years on the 15 catches that he does have, he has no missed tackles forced, right? Last year, he had a pass rating when targeted of 15.2 on 22 targets. That's not great. Obviously, he was in New England last year, and they had an awful quarterback situation. Yeah. But even the year before with the Vikings, it wasn't great. And the 2 years he had in Philadelphia, I mean, first of all, to only be in Philadelphia for 2 years before they trade you kind of for nothing to the Minnesota Vikings, and you don't even stick around there until your rookie contract, isn't a great sign. I think for me, it's hard to just put aside, the fact that now this is his fourth team in 5 years, right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. It's hard for me to get super excited about it. He did have 7 catches for 138 yards last year. A 19.7 average is pretty nice. That's obviously a big play guy. That's not really what he's been so far. And to me, I think I would rather see, if it comes to it, more Brandon Rice on the field getting some opportunities than someone like Jalen Reagor being a big part of the offense.
I'm 100% with you, and I'm glad that you brought up Brendan Rice's name. He was activated for the first time against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but we didn't really see him on the football field, unfortunately. Yeah. So hopefully Brendan Rice starts to get some more of those opportunities, because the chemistry that we heard of between him and Justin Herbert was really, really good, and they were making a lot of plays. Obviously, it's still up in the air if Justin Herbert's going to play on Sunday. Hopefully, we'll find out more information when the practice, and the injury reports come out. But Brendan Rice seems to me like a guy that's just been waiting patiently for his opportunity, and I feel like is a guy that's really going to make the most of it when he gets his chance to go out there and make some plays.
Yeah, and it just also feels like to me when you're talking about an offensive line that has some issues like it does right now, dealing with some injuries and also just some issues on the interior in general, even with the starters you went into the season with. Sometimes you want a guy who you can throw it up to, right, when there's pressure and just trust that he's going to make a catch. I'm not saying that Justin Herbert has that trust in him yet, but he's definitely one of the guys and one of the few guys in that wide receiver room right now where that is actually one of his calling cards, the ability to make contested catches and come down with balls that are put up in the air. It's not a strategy you want to live by, but let's be honest, at certain points, that's what it's coming down to for Justin Herbert, and sometimes that's been the only option that he has. So I think that Brendan Rice, especially in a game like this, especially even if it's not Justin Herbert, right? Especially if Josh Palmer misses this game, no reason a game like this, Brendan Rice shouldn't be getting a legitimate amount of snaps and actually getting to see some time on the field, right? We know a little bit what Lyle McConkey can bring. We know a little bit about what Quentin Johnston brings to the table. Simi Fehoko, was fine last week. Great run blocker. He definitely does that well. But Brendan Rice can run block too. So hopefully we see him a little bit more this week, especially given this scenario. And hopefully we see a little bit more of Kamani Vidal, and I know that's what Matthew thinks. Let's hear what he has for us this week.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Matthew. So we have Gus Edwards. I know he was an off-season hurt, whatever. He hasn't done so well. I know, last week he had about 3 carries for 9 yards. Just curious. I mean, if he's not doing so well, should we start having a conversation of bringing in Kamani Vidal, maybe back the bye week? Let me know what you guys think about that. Thank you guys. What's up, baby?
It's a great question, David, and I know a lot of people have been wanting to see Kamani Vidal, who's been, unfortunately, a healthy scratch, and a lot of the reason for that is because they're keeping 3 running backs active, and it's been Hassan Haskins who gets the role of that third running back who's mainly a special teams player. That is what Hassan Haskins brings to the table. He has 3 carries this year. As far as how many carries the third running back, even when active, will get, he has 3 carries this year, and it was all in garbage time against the Panthers. So there's really not a lot as this offense is currently constituted right now for a third running back to get any kind of legitimate run. To me, it's so hard to know what Gus Edwards brings to the table, man, because it just does feel like there is hidden value there. And when you do have to have that guy running into you 15 times a game, I do think it does a substantial kind of damage to the defense that doesn't show up on the box score. At the same time, though, I do want to see what Kamani Vidal can do.
I'm with you. Yeah, and just looking at Gus Edwards and what he's done so far this year, it's 32 carries, 94 yards. 1 carry of 10+ yards, no forced missed tackles, and 2.13 yards after contact per attempt, which, that's okay. That's decent. But, this is a guy that is known for really succeeding on the short yardage situations. And even in that, we haven't seen as much success this year as he has provided in previous years in those situations. So, hopefully it's just a situation to where he needs to get more in rhythm, but I do feel like there is value with having a bigger back constantly slamming into the defense and wearing them down and opening things up for a J.K. Dobbins or, a Kamani Vidal if he gets his opportunities to come in, because I do like Kamani Vidal's skill set. I feel like this is a guy who can really, hit the holes. He has good vision. He really runs with a really low center of gravity. He's hard to tackle. And I feel like it's a guy that can really rumble. And I feel like would be an asset, but he's got to make it, on game days to be active. And, Hassan Haskins has played 54 special team snaps. And so that's where his value comes. So unless Gus Edwards, gets hurt or just is completely ineffective, I think they're probably going to continue to roll with him.
It feels like the only way you see him is if they keep 4 running backs active on game day. And it does also feel like if you're talking about which skill set he most closely resembles, it's definitely J.K. Dobbins, right? It does feel like Kamani Vidal is kind of that J.K. Dobbins backup. But the good thing is Kamani Vidal comes in as a ready-to-go pass protector, which is always not a given for a rookie. He can do that. He's ready to go as a third down back. He brings a lot of the same things to the table that J.K. Dobbins does to a lesser extent. But if you're only going to give Gus Edwards 3 carries in a game, that should be more of what a Kamani Vidal role is. If Gus Edwards is giving 3 carries a game, that's not going to batter any defense. Any defense can withstand that, right? So it just feels like if you're not going to use Gus Edwards in that way to be that battering ram to try to soften up the front on the other side, maybe do give someone like a Kamani Vidal a couple of snaps here and there as a change of pace guy and someone that can just bring some juice outside of J.K. Dobbins. Because right now, Gus Edwards, whether it's an injury he's coming back from or whatever it is, does not have that juice currently. But we still have more to get into, including Daiyan Henley and what his potential ceiling is after what we've seen so far, which has been super impressive. And Patrick Mahomes with his first matchup against the Chargers' new defensive coordinator, Jesse Minter, and much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys about FanDuel because, hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. The odds are out already for the Chargers game against the Chiefs. As I looked at it, the Chargers are 8.5-point underdogs going into this one, which is no surprise. I don't think they expect Justin Herbert to be playing in this game, which is definitely going to move the line pretty much as any quarterback, I think, in the league. You know, maybe Patrick Mahomes, but they have such a well-run team. We've seen them win with backups. So they're expecting Justin Herbert not to play at this point. I think that Wednesday will have a lot to do with this line. So if you're interested in it, make sure to keep up with that on FanDuel. They also have a bunch of specific Shohei Ohtani parlays that you can build right now as he has his historic season. And I'm telling you to go under on all of them because I told you to do it last time. The Padres shut him down basically in the first game of this matchup as they turned a triple play to win or at least clinch a postseason spot. So it's so much fun betting on baseball, and now football is back to it's the best time of the year. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet on FanDuel. That's FanDuel.com. All right, David, let's continue this Chargers mailbag here with a great question from one of our listeners, one of the everydayers out there. She comes to us with this question today who says, what is Daiyan Henley's ceiling considering his strong start to the season? So I think this is a great question because Daiyan Henley was one of the guys that we were so excited to see, a guy that we truly thought could be a breakout candidate for this defense, especially with the tutoring of not only Navarro Bowman, but also getting to play alongside a veteran like a Denzel Perryman. But also just because we just saw a tiny sample size of it last year and he was really good. And David, I mean, I would say pretty much in any metric you're going to look at that Daiyan Henley has lived up to the hype of what we wanted to see from him in 3 games this year.
He's been spectacular, man. 28 tackles, 1 pass defense, tied for the 6th most solo tackles in the league through 3 games. Daiyan Henley is just constantly around the football. Like he is getting to the ball carrier. He is all over the place. He is a guy that is like not a liability at all in coverage. Like he can actually go out there and cover people. And like, he's got the speed, he's got the instincts, being a former safety, he looks comfortable doing it. And he really is, he's really, really good at that. And I love the ferocity and the emotion that he plays with. Daiyan Henley has been a true asset. And I think when we're talking about as far as what his ceiling or what he could possibly achieve, I think that, 120 plus tackles, anywhere from 8 to 10 passes defensed, 3, I'd say, 3 interceptions, maybe 2 to 4 sacks. I think this is a guy that could really, stuff the stat sheet because he has that type of ability to affect the game.
Yeah, and the question here is what is his ceiling, right? And I think that's more of like a career thing. What can he turn into with what we've seen so far? And it's probably still too soon to tell, right? Sure. Like, I think the one thing that you would think to yourself 3 games into the season is like, this is a dude who is going to be a starter for the Chargers
for a long time,
the foreseeable future, right? At least through the end of his rookie contract. I think another thing that you feel like is, hey, we finally kind of solved a liability that has been really, really taxing us every single season, and it hasn't been great, right? But if he continues to play like this, then you're talking about a different stratosphere, right? Then you're talking about potential kind of top 10 linebacker in the league territory.
Yeah.
That is what he has. That is the potential that he has. I mean, you talked about some of the stats so far this year. The one thing that impressed me the most, at least from PFF, he has 13 defensive stops, which means he either stops a pass that's caught in front of him for a decent gain that still brings up a 3rd down or a long 2nd down, or it means you get a run stuff within 2 yards of the line of scrimmage. He has 13 of those in 3 games so far this year. That's second amongst every single linebacker in the NFL. He's also the 9th highest graded defender at the linebacker position so far for anyone who's played 50 snaps defensively. He's been top 10. He's the 9th overall, and he's been the 7th highest graded coverage linebacker. And I think where you see that the most, because he only has 1 pass breakup this year, it's minimizing those gains. Like the way that he's able to get out in the flats and really minimize games and force third downs from other teams and just turn, keep small gains, I think is
not
huge.
just look completely lost, right?
Sure.
Like we've seen it in the past.
He's not just covering grass.
Yeah.
The other thing is, too, is like talking about what it was in the past. I mean, if you're looking just at the overall defensive grades at linebacker, out of 79 linebackers that have at least 50 snaps, Drew Tranquil, Kenneth Murray, and Kazir White all rank in the bottom 11 of those 79 eligible linebackers. So it's looking better now than it has in a long time is the only reason I bring that up. I think he can get better as a blitzer because I think with that athleticism, right, like he's only going to get better. But if he reaches his true potential, being a top 10 linebacker is very much in the conversation for Daiyan Henley. We have to see him continue it, but he's been really, really good. Solid tackler as well. I think he'll finish with less than 10% missed tackle rate, which I think at the linebacker position is kind of the golden number. So he's exactly there now. And I think it'll get better as the season continues. But we do have Athir calling into the show, and he wants to know what Jesse Minter has planned for a little man named Patrick Mahomes coming up this weekend. Let's see what he has for us.
Dan, David, this is Athir. Okay, I got a question. If Justin Herbert does not go on Sunday, what we are expecting from Jesse Minter defense? It's just going to be the game that we all been waiting for. Love to hear you. Thank you.
Athir, I mean, I think it's a great question as far as, what should we expect for Jesse Minter against Patrick Mahomes? Because that is how you're going to be graded if you were coaching defense for the Chargers in the AFC West against the Kansas City Chiefs. That is the ultimate bar. I think what you bring up about Justin Herbert, though, is a good point, because if you don't have the offense to be able to sustain drives, be able to give the defense a breather, it's going to be a much longer game. And I don't think it would all be an indictment of Jesse Minter, because as we saw in the last game, right, Jesse Minter's defense was great, had them right in it until they were on the field like 13 minutes on 2 drives in the second half and just kept going 3 and out offensively. That's going to kill every defense. So I expect him to keep it competitive. I have faith in Jesse Minter to, at least be able to slow the Chiefs down a little bit. And I think if Justin Herbert's in the game, I think he gives you a legitimate chance to win. And that's all you can really ask for. But I do think it's good to temper expectations knowing that he's going into this game with no Joey Bosa likely. We know he's not going to have Derwin James after his appeal was denied by the NFL. Whatever. It's hard to expect a lot from him, David, but I still have a lot of faith that, hey, if Justin Herbert was here, if he had some of those guys, like he would be able to give them a chance to win.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think looking at the Chiefs offense, at least so far, like it's a little bit different, than it has been. At least when you look at Patrick Mahomes, he's thrown 5 touchdowns, but he's thrown 4 picks already through 3 games. And so like there's some mistakes out there. And if you could force him into those, and this is the type of game where you're way, way, way less than 100% strength, you need to go get a turnover, give your offense a short field so they can go out there and punch it in. Travis Kelce has not been himself. He has not been very impactful, only 8 catches for 69 yards. Rashee Rice has been their top target, 24 receptions, 288 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then they have the fastest man in the history of the combine with Xavier Worthy, who has had 1 carry for 21 yards, which went for a touchdown, and 6 receptions on 11 targets for 81 yards. So, you know what you're going to get with this Chiefs offense. They're going to dink and dunk and matriculate down the football field. They have an injured running back, so they bring in Kareem Hunt. So it's going to be a different operation for them as well. So Jesse Minter is going to have to keep Patrick Mahomes contained, is going to have to get after him, and they're going to have to hope to be able to generate some turnovers to help the offense.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm kind of looking forward. We have the crossover tomorrow, a crossover Thursday, and it sucks having to go into, talk with the Locked On Chiefs, knowing that the Chargers aren't going to be able to give this one their best shot, right? But I do think that at least with Jesse Minter, one of the things I think you're much more hopeful about is the discipline, right? Because like that is one of the things that Andy Reid does so well. And what the Chiefs do so well is they just get your eyes going one direction and hit you the other side, right? Yeah. And it's all short. It's all behind the line of scrimmage. It's a ton of motion and things like that. And the Chargers have just been a much more disciplined defense this year under Jesse Minter. And I think that is something that'll help them for this game, right? Even if the final score isn't indicative of kind of what the game plan is. Like, I think he could overachieve Jesse Minter, that is, in this game and give up 24 or 27 points, depending on what the offense is able to do on the other side. But as we look towards this week in this matchup, the Chargers, without Justin Herbert likely, without their top tackles, without other star players, they're going to have to play like a perfect game. And there's something a little bit fun about nobody believing it can happen and kind of needing perfection and needing to pull off one of the biggest upsets in team history with a backup quarterback. It'll be some fun to talk about. But we still have more to get into on today's show because we do still have other great fan mail questions to get into, like, obviously, this problem for the Chargers at center. And with the bye week coming up, feels like this is a really, really big game for Bradley Bozeman, or else maybe some other options have to be explored. So we're going to talk about that and much more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, I need to tell you guys that this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp, and kids are always curious, learning, and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. And what's something that you'd like to learn, whether it's gardening or a new language, or maybe how to finally beat your best friend in bowling, whatever it is, therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back-to-school era can come at any age. And this always makes me think of my grandma, who was able to always tell me the benefits of therapy and was a big advocate for it. And therapy helped her go back to college and graduate as like a 68-year-old. And that's always been something I've been so proud of. And therapy can help with that. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It might not be for everyone, but it's worth it to give it a try. And also, you want to make sure that you find the right fit. It might not be the right fit at the very first time you do it, but you get a licensed therapist and can switch at any time with no additional charge with BetterHelp. And it's entirely online, designed to be convenient and flexible to your schedule. So rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. All right, David, let's get into the rest of these fan mail questions, including, I think, one that we had from several people just about the Chargers in the center position. Obviously, Bradley Bozeman is a guest on the show, someone we are really hoping that could bounce back this season. And in certain ways, he's been good. And, as a run blocker, I think he's been fine. But as a pass protector, it just hasn't been there to this point at all, unfortunately, as much as we want him to be that guy, and he wants to be that guy going forward for the Chargers. That just hasn't been the case. So we have that and much more to talk about, but I do want to thank everyone for making us your first listen. Thank you to everyone who hit us up at Locked On LAC or called into 323-524-7924 on the voicemail line to get your question in, and you can hit that up for buy or sells as well. If you guys need a second listen, make sure to check out the new lineup at Locked On NFL, where you don't even need coffee in the morning because you can just get the madman Tyler Rowland, who's going to wake you up with his football takes, and you can chill out a little bit in the barbershop with Tony Wiggins as they bring on the NFL experts who cover their teams every day from around the Locked On Podcast Network. So check that out on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from. David, let's get into a question that we have here from JT the Nut, and something that we saw. Bitcoin on Twitter also had a very similar question to this. He says, I'm still upset the Chargers didn't take a center in the draft last year. 2 cornerbacks seemed odd at the time, and now I'm not sure what to think. I think Ortiz did well, but the failure to address replacing Corey Linsley, is costing this team big time right now. Any solutions? So, David, for the most part, a lot of the guys that the Chargers pegged to bounce back have bounced back. Christian Fulton has looked awesome. Denzel Perryman has looked great. Elijah Molden, outside of that last game, had looked really, really good too. But it hasn't been everyone, right? That's just the frankly what it's been. And Bradley Bozeman has been a liability in pass protection this year. We were big advocates of finding centers in the draft. There was many guys who went late, right? Like, we knew there was good guys like a JPJ or a Zach Frazier. We knew there was guys we liked later on with like a Cedric Van Pran, a Hunter Nurzad that went later on the draft. But now the Chargers have who they have. They can't go back. And this was a great center draft, and they passed on it. But he so far has given up 4 pressures and 1 sack so far this year. But I think that doesn't really show how bad it's been. He's been getting pushed back into Justin Herbert's lap a lot. Some plays have been totally derailed by his inability to kind of anchor and be that guy in the middle in pass protection. He has a big week coming up this week, David, against Chris Jones, where he could prove a lot. But it does feel like a little bit, if it doesn't happen this week, you have one bye week in the season, and that's where maybe some other options have to be explored.
Yeah, and then I think when you're looking at those options, you're looking at, who can fill in right away. Well, it's Brendan Hymus, who's currently their backup center. Which
isn't going to excite, I think, Charger fans much, right?
I get it. I understand that, like, he's a guy who's switched from a couple of different positions to become a center. And I think when he came in and played last year, he was up and down. He was all right. Then it's Jordan McFadden, who could also potentially come in, who they've been cross-training. And then it's, Joe Ortiz going out there and trying to make a trade. The only problem with that is teams don't trade good interior pass protectors.
No.
They don't trade good centers. So you really are going to have to find a team that's already out of it, already looking for next year, and try to capitalize on an opportunity that may present itself from that perspective. The one good thing that we do know is that Joe Ortiz will go out there and improve the football team. If he sees any kind of opportunity, he is going to go take it. So at least you have a guy who's not afraid to go out there and wheel and deal and go make your team better if he has the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if we've seen Jordan McFadden enough at center that they would be comfortable to do it. I know that, they have Brendan Hymus, so they at least trust him enough to be their primary backup to Bradley Bozeman. But there is one more option on the practice squad, and that's Sam Mustipher. And it's not a lot of times that you actually have a center on your practice squad that has played over 1,000 snaps as a starter in this league, had a really good preseason. Maybe that's something they explore as well. So they do have some options. None of them are going to blow you away, but at the same time, it will probably feel like you have to at least experiment. Like I said, I hope Bradley Bozeman, has the best game of his career against Chris Jones, and we feel a lot differently about this position going into the bye week. We just haven't seen it up till this point yet, as much as we've hoped he could bounce back. Great dude. So cool seeing what they did in the community in Charlotte during their time there, an extra week there. But as far as on the field goes, this is something that has to be addressed because it's been a huge liability so far. So let's get to this next one here from Leisha, who's hitting us up on Twitter, who says, who do you think will play both tackle spots on Sunday without Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater? David, how do you think they fill those voids on Sunday?
Yeah, well, I think Daniel Popper of The Athletic gave a couple of pretty fantastic options and pretty realistic solutions for that situation. So, he said that a potential starting group could, look like, Foster Sarah at left tackle, Zion Johnson at left guard, Bradley Bozeman at center, Sawyer at right guard, and then moving Trey Pipkins back out to right tackle, which
that's how I have it.
Makes a lot of sense. That's what I thought. Obviously, we've seen Foster Sorrell in the past and it hasn't been that great. To put it mildly, I think he was okay in the preseason. I think he was decent, but you're going to have to figure it out. It's going to have to be that, or, he presented one other option, which is, moving Bradley Bozeman to guard and then putting Brendan Hymus at center. So there's a couple of things that you can, mix and match and move around. But I think, Sorrell at left tackle and Pipkins at right tackle is what kind of makes the most sense.
Yeah, which is interesting, right? Because in the game, we saw Joe, or at least Rashawn Slater, go out first, and they put Jamari Sawyer in there for like one play, and then they moved him out, and then they immediately put Trey Pipkins in at left tackle, and then ended up having on the right side Jamari Sawyer put in there, but Joe Alt was still in the game, so Sawyer was in at right guard. We didn't get to see what would happen with both the tackles out because Joe Alt got hurt on the last play of the game, so we didn't see how they would do it. I think it makes the most sense to have Trey Pipkins at right tackle where he played all of last season. It makes sense to have Jamari Sawyer at right guard where he played all of last season, even if neither of those guys played exceptionally well. Yeah. And you just have the least amount of change, and I think the most amount of comfortability there. Foster Sarrell on the left side with Zion Johnson, that's a problem. I mean, the whole thing is going to be a problem this week without the two best players on that offensive line already. But that is, to me, what is most likely. Hey, maybe they feel like Bradley Bozeman can be a better guard, and maybe getting him out of that center position and getting Brendan Hymus in there makes you moderately better in that regard. Hard to say, because Trey Pipkins hasn't been terrible so far as a guard. But when he got out to tackle, obviously on a week where he didn't get to prepare for being a tackle, it was really, really bad. And it's hard to say. I mean, he gave up 2 sacks in this last game, right?
Yeah, so, tough.
I mean, but that's such a hard thing to ask, where at least this week they're going to know all week where they're going to be playing. So hopefully Daniel Bomber can see that in practice, what it is, and tell us exactly what it's going to be, so we're not having to guess. But let's get to this last one here from Mike W, who says, if we're sitting and walking wounded and come out of the bye week relatively healed up at 2-2, what do you think the rest of the schedule looks like? I mean, to me, like I said, it's going to be almost impossible to win this game missing the guys the Chargers have this weekend. I'm not going to, sugarcoat it at all. But I think the best case scenario is to try to go on a run after the bye week, assuming you're a little bit healthier. David, kind of what are your expectations as far as, what they could do immediately coming out of the bye if we go into 2-2?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at the schedule, with the 13 games that are left, I still think there's a lot of beatable games. I think there's at least 8 very beatable teams there on the record and on the schedule there. But I think, the Saints look like they're going to be pretty tough, especially offensively. The Falcons are a team I think that could go either way. I think the Ravens still at 0-3. I'm not convinced that they're a bad, or
they're
1-2. Excuse me, 1-2. I'm not convinced that they're a bad football team at this point. The Chiefs and then the Bucks. The Bucks, have looked pretty good so far under Baker Mayfield. So those are a couple of teams that I think are still going to be dangerous. But I still feel like there's a lot of opportunity in front of the Chargers to go out there and win a lot of football games if they take care of their business. And they're a lot healthier than they are right now.
Yeah, which, we'll see what they look like even after this week, right? Because people can get hurt every week. I think just looking at like the 5 games right after the bye week, right? What they can do immediately after that. I think the hard thing are the teams that look better than maybe we expected them to look. Like Arizona might be 1-2. That team took the Lions and the Bills to the brink. Like the Arizona Cardinals are a scrappy team who blew out the Rams when they played them only last week. So it's easy to forget, and 1-2 seems bad. I think they're a better team and are going to present a challenge. You have them at Arizona in week 7. Week 6 in Denver is always a hard game. They actually looked like a competent offense last week. So we'll see what that looks like with Bo Nix. Week 8 home versus the Saints is going to be tough, like you said. Week 9 at the Browns, I like that in favor of the Chargers. Week 10 at home versus the Titans, I like that for the Chargers as well. They've been kind of a mess. But, hey, 3-2, 4-1 in that next 5 games is going to be super important for the Chargers as they try to get their season back on track after what was a bloodbath last week. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Make sure you're back here tomorrow for Crossover Thursday. Locked on Chargers, Locked on Chiefs, 3-0. So annoying, but we're going to have fun with it this week. There's still a lot the Chargers can learn about their team this week. Justin Herbert or not, elite tackles or not, Derwin James, Joey Bosa or not. There's a lot that they can learn this week, but they're going to have to take, if they're trying to pull off a historic upset, it's going to have to be pretty much perfection. But make sure you guys are here tomorrow to check out Crossover Thursday. To make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from, as well as finding us on all of our social media. You can hit us up on Twitter at LockedOnLIC. You can find us on the voicemail line at 323-524-7924, but also on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. Tomorrow, Crossover Thursday, Locked On Chargers, Locked On Chiefs. Make sure you guys are here for that. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.